Well, joining me right now is Massachusetts Congressman Jake Auchincloss, a Democratic member of the House Transportation and Infrastructure and Financial Services Committees. He also served in the U.S. Marine Corps. Congressman, welcome, sir, to you. Let me ask very quickly about the breaking news at the top of this hour with the United States State Department issuing a Travel 4 level advisory telling all Americans get out of Russia now. It used to be let's make your way. Now it's leave. And coinciding with the reports about the arrest of WNBA star Brittany Griner. What are your thoughts on that and how that has exacerbated the situation?
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me on. Americans should heed that warning from the State Department. The last two times they issued these warnings, it was Afghanistan and Ukraine itself. So I think it's clear that if you're an American in Russia now, it's time to get out.
Absolutely. And let me just make sure that to clarify, apparently a Russia word is that she has been detained, not arrested yet. And so we'll be following all the details on that. To you, is there a distinction when you get that from Russia that somebody has been detained versus arrested?
Well, for countries with the rule of law, there certainly is a distinction. I'm not going to weigh in on consular affairs. This is not a case I've been tracking, so I don't think it would be responsible for me to offer my thoughts or path forward for an individual consular affairs case. But the Russian government needs to know generally that Americans treat their citizens abroad as deserving of the same protections as we do our citizens at home.
Indeed. And in your defense, sir, this story just broke about an hour ago, so it would be next to impossible for you to have tracked it very thoroughly at this point. Let's move into what we know has happened, and that is the violence which has grown considerably in Ukraine this week. What has been your reaction to it, given your experience as a Marine? Are you concerned with how far Russian forces will go? Do you see a limit to that?
Not only is the Russian invasion of Ukraine by itself illegal, in that it had no internationally recognized cause of war, but the conduct of the war is itself illegal in that they are indiscriminately targeting civilians, they are not providing for humanitarian relief, and that they are not sufficiently taking into account actions to reduce the chance of collateral damage. So the war itself, as well as the conduct of the war, both are illegal under international law, and Vladimir Putin needs to be held to account.
And to that end, the U.S. ambassador to the UN says that she's seen video of Russia moving those cluster munitions, the vacuum bombs, even onto the battlefield. They are banned under the Geneva Convention. So how dangerous is this kind of weaponry? What does it tell you about where this conflict is heading?
What it tells us is that the Russian military, by logistics, by training, by morale, has been unimpressive in these first week and a half. And it's getting frustrated. And more importantly, Vladimir Putin is getting frustrated. And as they get frustrated, the Russian forces, which traditionally have relied on artillery more than they have on infantry or highly trained ground forces, are going to be shelling civilian areas indiscriminately and leading to high casualties. This reinforces why the United States needs to do three things, I believe, immediately. One is oil. We've got to cut off the oil. It's by far the most important source of hard currency and government surplus for the Russian economy right now. Number two, we've got to wage secondary sanctions against China and use diplomatic pressure to get China to further isolate Russia. And number three, airplanes. We need to work with Poland and Lithuania and Romania to provide airplanes to the Ukrainian fighters and to backfill those for our Eastern NATO allies.
Okay, speaking of airplanes, Ukraine's president has repeatedly urged Western leaders impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine. However, Secretary of State Antony Blinken yesterday explaining why the U.S. and NATO allies won't do it. Let's take a listen to what he said.
The only way to actually implement something like a no-fly zone is to send NATO planes into Ukrainian airspace and to shoot down Russian planes. And that could lead to a full-fledged war in Europe. President Biden has been clear that we are not going to get into a war with Russia.
Congressman, is that how you see it?
Yes, and I think the term no-fly zone gets tossed around, and people presume, because of the way it sounds, as though it's some kind of passive gesture. A no-fly zone is an act of war. Right now, there's air parity in Ukraine, meaning both sides are duking it out. A no-fly zone requires air supremacy. That means that NATO fighter jets would need to be directly engaging in dogfights and downing Russian fighter jets, and we would need to be attacking surface-to-air missiles from the Russian forces in Russian-held territory in Ukraine. We would be going to war with Russia. That's what a no-fly zone means. That is an unnecessary escalation in the conflict that risks a wider war. What we can do, though, is work with our NATO allies to provide the Ukrainian forces with their #1 item on their supply wish list, which is more planes, more drones, and more surface-to-air missiles.
And in fact, President Putin earlier today saying that if we were to impose a no-fly zone, any third party, that would be seen in his mind as a declaration of war. Let me ask you about Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, who tweeted on Thursday, writing about Putin, quote, "The only way this ends is for somebody in Russia to take this guy out." Senator Graham then doubling down on that sentiment. Take a listen, sir.
The best way for this to end is have an Elliot Ness, a Wyatt Earp in Russia, the Russian Spring, so to speak, where people rise up and take him down, because if he continues to be their leader, then he's going to make you complicit with war crimes. You're a good people. You'll never have a future. You'll be isolated from the world, and you'll live in abject poverty. So I'm hoping somebody in Russia will understand that he's destroying Russia, and you need to take this guy out by any means possible.
What is your reaction to that? And my question to you also, is that something a U.S. government official should say in public?
It's just a reminder of how lucky we are as a nation that Donald Trump and his cronies are not in charge right now. They'd have us probably out of NATO and supporting Putin if they were. You got one part of the Republican Party rooting Putin on actively, and then you get another part of the Republican Party trying to break international law by killing him. It underscores how vital it is to have a sober, seasoned foreign policy hand like Joe Biden in the White House, who is keeping the pressure up but the temperature down.
You said earlier that you think we should be reducing the oil output there. A number of lawmakers are joining that and voicing support for banning oil of any kind coming from Russia. But right now, as you know, the national average for a regular gallon of gas, that's $3.83. In your state, Massachusetts, average slightly higher, around $3.86. And I must add, I think that was as of late last night. Calculations for today could be even higher. So are your constituents telling you they're feeling the pain in their wallets? And how do you balance punishing Russia rather, on its oil exports versus the likelihood of even higher gas prices for Americans?
My constituents are telling me that they want the United States to stand with Ukraine. The fossil fuel industry is not going to defend the free world. Americans need to. The president is working through the Strategic Petroleum Reserve and with OPEC to buffer American consumers from volatility in energy prices. We have much less exposure to Russian oil than do our European allies. And we all need to invest in defending the Ukrainian people against this unjust and unprovoked invasion.
We have Republican Senator Marco Rubio, who has tweeted this, that America doesn't need Putin's oil, even if it is being sold at a sharp discount. We have our own. Let's use it. Do you agree with that?
I agree that the United States needs to radically expand our own energy production. Republicans are always talking about energy independence, and I say, yes, clean energy independence. Here in Massachusetts, we've got geothermal, offshore wind, solar. We're making investments in battery R&D. Let this be a clarion call for us to transition to a clean energy economy. And while that can be a medium and long-term goal, in the short term, we should be working with our OPEC allies, and we should be judiciously expanding our own domestic capacity to ensure that American consumers are not going to get gouged at the pump.
Massachusetts Congressman Jake Auchincloss, thank you, sir, for your time on this very busy Saturday. Much appreciated. Let's go now to what the United Nations is warning could be the largest